Okay, today we are going to decide on a light direction and draw our cast shadows. In order to do that, we are going to shade. So I've decided my light direction is going to come from the left, and I've already shaded a background a little bit. And I did as light as I could. So the lightest starting with a number 2 on our value scale and going into a 4 kind of in the background, but fading back out to that 2 and the number 3. So I'm going to start with my cone, and I've already shaded this the lightest I could get it. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to start adding a little bit of darkness. And I'm going to go in overlapping circles so that I have a smooth shading, because I'm going to try to make it as smooth as possible without any scratch marks. And then I'm going to go back up to the top and start shading downward again. And I don't want this to look flat, and that's one reason why I'm using overlapping circles. And I'm using the side of my pencil, and then I'm going to start moving outward. So I've got my darkest area almost complete. And then I don't want to leave a harsh line. So I'm going to start transitioning that to a middle gray. And again, I'm still using overlapping circles so that that line is blended out. So I'm starting to blend, and I have my middle gray, and it's faded back to the number 2. So I'm going to go back and blend out this line. All right, so we've got this transition, the lights coming down over here, and this is my darker side. So I'm going to go back in and make it a tiny bit darker. So I want that edge to be a nice clean edge, a little bit darker. And I want to try to leave it to where this still looks like a cone and it's curved on the bottom. All right. You can kind of do that a little bit. And All right. So once we get this blended, and I'm going to work on this a little bit more, then we'll be able to do our cast shadow. And if you feel like you went in a little too dark, because I did right here, you can take a Kleenex or you can go in circles with a white eraser and make that more of a transition, and it has a better blend. All right. So now I'm going to work on my cast shadow. And if my pencil gets flat, I'm going to roll it over to the side that still has lead. And I'm going to do a light hazy shadow at first. All right. So if you feel like your pencil is starting to get dull, make sure you have another one. I always keep two pencils. So what you want to do is this cast shadow is going to be the darkest right up next to your cone. Now you don't want to leave a dark area like that. We're going to fade this out somewhat, and we're going to blend this just like we did the week before before we did this in a geometric still life. So we're doing the same thing, but we're putting this all together now. Okay, it looks like I've got a nice good blend. And here is the cast shadow or our cone. Next, we're going to do our cube. And I changed the position a little bit from the original picture. So it's kind of next to or in the same line of sight with the cone. So it looks like it's slightly behind it. In the original picture, the cone was a little bit further back. But I never do anything quite the same as the picture that I'm using. I always change it slightly a little bit so that I'm not completely copying someone else's work if I'm using a reference. All right, so since this is going to be slightly behind that, I made this face slightly darker. And so the light direction is coming this way. So we're going to follow our angle, and it's coming on the top. And so it's going to be a little gray up here, but we're going to fade this back to a light gray. So maybe I have this edge that is clean, dark here, and then fade light. So then this side, it's on the opposite side of where the light is. So it's going to be my darkest side. And so I tilt my paper. It's easier for me to draw. Sometimes I even turn my paper upside down. All right, so that's our darkest side, away from the light, a little bit shaded, and then it's faded back out. And I'm still using my overlapping circles, even if it may look like I'm not, to get that nice smooth blend from dark to light. Okay, so I've made some little marks here to let me know where my cast shadow is going to be. So I'm just going to go in slightly and just make this area a little darker. And it's going to look a little hazy around this edge right here because I don't need it to be a solid square. Now up against my cube, I'm going to put the pressure on my pencil. So I'm pushing down with this finger, okay, my pointer finger, and then I'm going to let up because I want to start fading that out. So we're going to blend that out, going in overlapping circles. And if it looks like I've left a line, I can go back in and go over that. Now I'm going to come to this side of the cube and go up against that edge, putting pressure with my pointer finger on the pencil, and I'm going to go in smaller overlapping circles. Again, sometimes I have to tilt my paper. All right, trying to clean up that edge a little bit. Okay, so there's the beginning of my cast shadow. And then I'm going to gradually let up on the pressure of my pencil. And I'm just going to lightly go over where I left that line and blend the line out. And then it kind of has this hazy look because it's a shadow, so it's not an outline. We're leaving a shadow. So there's my shadow to the cube. All right, so I'm going to go in here and make some sketch marks where I think the shadows are going to be on the sphere and my cylinder. So right here is where I think my cast shadows are going to be. So I'm going to start with the sphere, and I'm going to use really tight, small, overlapping circles. And then I'm going to blend that out. So we still want this hazy look around the shadow. Then I'm going to go back in and shade this sphere because it's a little light. It looks flat. We don't want to leave it like that. All right, so there's our shadow. I think it looks pretty good. So I'm probably going to leave it. Sometimes you have to learn that once something looks correct, even if there's 100 different things you can do to it, you just have to let it be. All right, now I'm going to go in and I've got some strange areas here because I'm going to start up here. And this is going to be my dark side. So we have to remember our light direction. It's coming from here. So this area that's the lightest part of the background. And I'm going to start again with those overlapping circles. And I am going to apply a little bit more pressure with my pointer finger, the index finger, on my pencil. And I've got my pencil laying on my middle finger, so even though it looks like I'm going straight up and down, I'm not. I'm still using the side of my pencil. And I'm going to use overlapping lines. And it may look a little rough at first, but that's okay. And we can fade out the shaded part. So sometimes when we're doing a spear, it ends up looking like a crescent moon, but we don't exactly want that. We don't want a deep line going through the spear. We just want a gradual shade. So, and I'm going to turn my paper because it helps the angle of my hand. And I'm going to start fading this out to the light gray that I already have. And I'm going to go along the curve of the spear. So I want that edge to show up, even though I'm not going real dark around it and it's supposed to be lighter. I still want that edge to show up. All right, now this is where I get a little strange, and I'm going to turn my paper upside down because it's easier for me. And I'm going to continue shading this spear. So we want this to look three-dimensional and not so flat. So I'm going to add a middle gray in here. We've got the dark gray up against the cube, and we're starting to fade it out. And then I'm going to add a middle gray next to this side of the cube. And I still want this highlight around the front of the spear because we know that there is a light source. So now it's starting to come into focus and it's not so flat. And I'm going to go in and just add some light shading in here. And it's going to get slightly darker because I'm layering and overlapping these circles. And then I'm going to fade back out to a light gray. So in a way, it does take on that moon shape, but we don't want a total line. You don't want a deep line going on here. You want to fade. And if you want to take the eraser, and you can go in and blend it, or you can take a Kleenex, or you can be really fun and take your finger and basically recreate that highlight if you feel like you got a little too dark. And then if you feel like you took too much away, you can still go back in and add more. So that's the beauty of shading with the overlapping circles. If you're real gentle with it, you can always add your darker areas and keep going. Okay, now we are ready to do our cylinder. And the highlight's going to go over here. And our darkest area is here, and then our cast shadow down here. So I'm going to tilt my paper because it's easier for me. And I like to start at the bottom and go in overlapping circles. Now, if it's more comfortable for you to start at the top, that's fine. This is just feels more natural for me to do this way. So I'm going to start with the side first. And so see, now it's coming to life. And I'm going to bear down. Accidentally got. All right, so I want to make that edge clean. I'm going to get real dark right here. So I'm going to do tight overlapping circles on my darkest area. So there is no light shining on this area. And I'm going to fade to a middle gray here. I do not want to leave this dark line. So I'm going to start transitioning from dark, and I'm going to fade back to this lightest gray that I have already shaded on there. All right. So you see how that's kind of starting to come alive now, and it's not just a dull gray figure in the background. It's starting to have some depth. So this whole process is about giving these forms the illusion of depth. And we're using an implied light source. So it's implied because this area is light and it's coming this way. So I'm still going to keep this going. All right. And if you accidentally put a ridge in there, just use the overlapping circles. So I'm going to keep doing this because I want that gradual blend. So we're learning how to blend. All right, so I've got a nice blend going on. So this is probably more like a 10. This is a 9. So we're going to fade this out now. And we want this to get this to like a 5 or a 6. So it goes back towards the highlight. I want that gradual gray. And I'm going to let up on the pressure of my pencil each time I decide that I want this fade to light. There we go. Look at that. Okay, and then you decide, well, am I happy with that? Or do I need to go darker in some areas? So if you think this needs a little bit more detail, you can go in here and put some shading around the edge. So it shows the light is coming this way. Okay, now I think we're ready for our cast shadow. So I'm going to tilt my paper and I'm going to go in those really tight overlapping circles again. So I want it completely dark right here around the edge. And then I'm going to start fading out. So this is my cast shadow. So it's casting this way. I'm going to fade this out. I'm going to go real dark up into the edge. Now, some people think, oh, I'm finished, but I don't like to leave a line. So I like to fade it out a little, blend it. It shows that the shadow isn't completely the same value when you're drawing with pencil. So there's my cast shadow. And go back in. I can try to get this like a 10 on the value scale up against the form. Now, if you feel like you've left some ridges, you just go over it lightly, blend it out. It's just more practice. So create that practice and start blending out. It's just practice of where to let up on your pencil. All right, here's my still life. So if you've noticed, the last thing I usually do is the table in the background. If you feel like you need to go in, you can add a little bit of value around your forms so that they stand out. They're not so flat. All right. So you want to give it the illusion that these forms are on a table. You want an implied light direction here. And all the highlights are going to be towards the left of each form. And their cast shadows towards the right if your implied light source is over here. This completes the geometric still life.